When talking about the time of his return, Jesus said, "But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only." Many people think that this means that we will have no idea when Jesus is about to come back. But is this true? Jesus gives us a very specific series of signs that precede his return. He compares these signs to the contractions that a woman experiences before giving birth. Like birth pains, the signs will start off less severe and less frequent. Yet as time goes on, the signs will become more severe and more frequent. In Matthew 24, Jesus tells us that the end begins with world war, famines, and earthquakes. Yet it gets worse. He goes on to talk of a global persecution where many people fall away from the faith. Next, Jesus tells us about the most notorious single event that shows that he is about to return. "So when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." As Jesus indicates, we can know what the abomination of desolation is based on its use in the book of Daniel. Theologians and Bible teachers know that this is a technical term which refers to an idol in the Jewish temple. However, Jesus implies the end-time idol is a person, not just a statue. In Mark 13, Jesus mentions the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be. Paul also teaches us about a man who idolizes himself in the temple, just prior to the return of Christ. "Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God." We cannot know the exact day or hour that Jesus will return. However, Daniel 9:27 tells us exactly when the abomination of desolation takes place. "And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator." Many theologians interpret this to mean that the Antichrist makes a 7-year contract with Israel. The whole passage provides the historical context that leads to that conclusion. Yet halfway through this 7-year contract, the abomination of desolation takes place. Therefore, 3.5 years from the start of the contract, the Antichrist will reveal himself in the temple. This will launch the worst time in human history. Jesus says, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." Even worse, false prophets will be able to do extremely convincing and deceptive miracles during this time. Then if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Finally, Jesus interrupts this terrible time with his return. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Believers who are paying attention to the signs will not be surprised that this is about to happen. As Jesus says, "From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates." Many theologians assume that the Great Tribulation is exactly 3.5 years. Since Christ sets up his kingdom on earth at the end of the 7 years, they assume the Great Tribulation goes until then. But is this true? Jesus is very clear that he comes on an unknown day, sometime after the abomination of desolation. His arrival causes the Great Tribulation to be cut short. Therefore, the Great Tribulation is an unspecified length of time. It starts in the middle of the 7-year period and abruptly ends at the coming of the Son of Man on an unknown day. Notice how each phase of labor gets shorter but more intense just before the baby is about to be born. In the same way, the final signs of Christ's return, though extremely painful, might not be very long. As soon as Jesus comes, the believers are gathered together. However, the world will face unexpected doom, similar to Noah's flood. But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. This is why Jesus tells us it's important to stay alert to the signs of his coming. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Paul describes these same events, but from a different angle. When describing an event which he calls the coming of the Lord, he says, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord." This comparison chart shows that the coming of the Son of Man, described by Jesus, is the same event as what Paul describes here. However, just like Jesus, Paul also describes the fate of the unbelievers who are not rescued from God's wrath at his coming. Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying, "There is peace and security," then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. This language is borrowed directly from Isaiah, which also talks about the day of the Lord. "Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. As destruction from the Almighty it will come. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor." When the day of the Lord begins, believers are rescued from God's wrath through the rapture. However, unbelievers experience unexpected destruction instead. Paul goes on to say that the believers who are awake will not be surprised by the second coming. "But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then let us not sleep, as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober." This lines up perfectly with what Jesus says when he tells us to stay awake. If we stay alert, we will not be surprised when he is about to come back. Revelation 6 describes many of the very same signs that Jesus does in Matthew 24, but from a different perspective. In this chapter, Jesus opens seals on a scroll. When the first 5 seals are opened, we see world war, famines, and global mass death, just like Jesus describes. We also see an ongoing persecution, where the dead cry out to God to judge those who killed them. Yet God does not pour out his wrath immediately. Only at the opening of the 6th seal does the day of the Lord begin, also known as the great day of their wrath. As you can see in this comparison chart, the events of the 6th seal are very similar to the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 24. As the book of Joel also says, "The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." This chart summarizes all of the conclusions we have come to so far. When listing the signs of his return, Jesus makes frequent references to prophecies that have already been foretold in Daniel. He even tells us that the most important single sign of his return, the abomination of desolation, was spoken of by the prophet Daniel. Even Jesus' favorite title for himself, the Son of Man, comes straight out of Daniel 7, a passage that discusses the Antichrist's empire, rise to power, and his ultimate defeat at the hands of God. Therefore, if Jesus thinks the book of Daniel is important for understanding the end times, then so should we. In recent history, many specific Daniel and Revelation prophecies have been fulfilled about the Antichrist's empire and his rise to power. Professional theologians have been anticipating these for years, yet now these incredible prophecies may have finally come to pass. Check out the next video, Proof that Jesus is Coming Soon, to learn more.